Hello, my name is Leticia Donovan, and I will be your host for today. Welcome to today's webinar, Design Consideration for High Performance Fleet Telematics. This webinar will be recorded and available on demand for future reference. Please submit your questions using the panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Today's agenda, we're going to cover, speaker introduction for Nathan Lee and Marco Stracuzzi. We also cover the growing trends in fleet telematics, as well as the design challenges of the fleet telematics ecosystem. We will close with going through connectivity solutions to drive your ecosystem performance. Today's speaker, we have Nathan Lee, Senior Manager of IoT Sales and Business Development at Telit Connectivity. Nathan Lee is Senior Manager of the IoT Sales and Business Development for Telit Connectivity's Data and Device Business Unit. Nathan leads the IoT Sales and Business Development team. We also have Marco Stracuzzi. He's the Head of Product Marketing, and he's responsible for working with product leadership and sales team to execute on go-to-market strategy that drives the global awareness and adoption of Telit product and solutions. We hope you enjoyed today's presentation, and without further ado, I invite Nathan to continue today's presentation.
Thank you, Leticia. So as Leticia talked about, today's webinar is going to be really focused on fleet telematics. So what we want to do also is give quick introductions of Telit Connectivity to you, and also for during Marco's presentation, he will also explain Telit's role in the fleet telematics space. So quick summary on TE. TE is basically a leading interconnect supplier with a strong focus on R&D. As you can see from some of the stats on the screen here, TE has 15,000 patents granted or at least pending. We have a heavy investment in engineering and research and development, and we employ a lot of engineers. So approximately 20% of our sales comes from new products. So let's dive in a little bit deeper. So as a part of the data and devices team, there's something in the IoT space. There is some unique products from the data and power team. And so, for example, some of the stats for these guys are 1.5 billion products have shipped in basically our financial year, 2021. We have over 230,000 different types of connectors and standard antenna products. Also, one of some of the interesting facts that we, when we started diving into this, is that we've learned that we have been shipping some of these products older than some of the companies that have been out there in the fleet telematics space. For example, one of our mini springs has been shipping since 1962. So that's an interesting fact that we discovered during this journey. Some of the other facts on our IoT antennas is that we've designed, produced, and sold and shipped over 1 billion devices globally. That's a pretty impressive stat if you actually look for a lot of different antenna companies out there. One of the other things is that we're in all the leading cell phone manufacturers around the world. We've been approved on all the major cellular carriers around the world, and we've been designed into video game consoles, handheld systems, wearable market, and even tier 1 metering customers. So TE has a very broad portfolio on the antenna space as your needs see fit for a lot of these complex markets. So let's dive into fleet telematics. So why fleet telematics? Fleet telematics is one of the largest growing business segments out there right now in the IoT space. So you have anywhere from basically like 17% of the overall market for vehicle telematics is focused on fleet telematics. And we see this as a very large growing base. So you have the global telematics space here, around a 8.4 CAGR. And then you also look at the fleet telematics space is growing actually more rapidly than that at 11.3 CAGR. So what's a basic fleet telematics system look like? So you have the data in the device. You have the data in the vehicle, for example, like the GPS location, the temperature of the coolant system, different parameters like that. And so you have also in vehicle devices, so that can mean anywhere from the humidity back in the trailer. For example, in a shipping container that the carrier is actually moving across country. And then you want to move that data up to the cellular network. And then as part of the cellular network, that data is passed on through the cellular network and posted on secure servers. And then as a part of that, the Fleet Telematics software does some analytics, things like that, tracking the devices around the country, saying, okay, does this driver need to be at this location by this time? Is he going to make it, not make it? Do we need to reschedule somebody? Things like that. So that's where the Fleet Telematics software really kicks in. Let's take a deeper dive into the actual design requirements for a lot of the engineers out there. So as TE being an interconnect supplier and Telit being a cellular modem and GPS supplier, engineers are really focused on a lot of different questions during that. So for one, environmental. What's the IP rating that this device needs to actually conform to? Connectivity. What cellular technology fits the application? We'll dive into that one a little bit deeper. The difference is the device going to be roaming between countries, for example. The GNSS requirements. Is there other requirements like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi that's important? And then also to look at the application. So the application, is this going to be an ATV, farm equipment, bus? What is the actual device going into? So that's an important piece on that. How is the device going to be powered too? That's another important piece that you really need to look at during the design factors. So let's dive into some of the solutions that TE can provide. So let's take a very basic block diagram here. You have a radio slash modem slash wireless communication module in most typical application in fleet telematics. Then you'll have some kind of controlling MCU or MPU, and then you may have some remote sensors or a camera out there. So for example, on the communication module, if you look at a communication module more, you could have all these different devices from Telit, for example. So Telit's the leading supplier in the cellular industry, in the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi markets, and also in the GNSS markets. So let's dive into this a little bit more of where the TE solutions kick in. So granted that you're going to be using a Telit module in all these devices, so let's walk around the devices around that Telit module, for example. So you'll have an antenna. So we'll look at antennas a little bit deeper. You'll have RF connectors, RF cabling, and if you're using a cellular device, you're more than likely going to have some kind of SIM card connector or a board level shielding, etc. So let's take a deeper dive into the antenna piece. What are some of the key questions that engineers ask on the antenna? For one, what wireless technologies do you want to support? Cellular, Bluetooth, etc. Is the device in the vehicle or outside the vehicle? If it's outside, what's the IP rating that it's going to be important for that antenna? Then you have to look at some of the common wireless protocols. So you'll have basically cellular in the sub 6 gigahertz range. You could have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, often used for configuring the device. For example, you may have a phone that you want to configure a new device on a new trailer or something like that. And they're also used for firmware updates. And then you're going to also probably more than likely, since you're tracking, you're going to use some kind of GNSS solution, GPS, some kind of positioning solution. And then some special applications out there do use the ISM band. This is a special band that's open to anybody to use, but these are usually special radio protocols, but TE offers antennas for all these types of solutions. Let's look at the different antenna manufacturing technologies that TE deploys today. So for example, we have what we call LDS. It's basically you take some stitching, some etching, and you actually lay down metal structures inside the plastics. And this is very common for small devices, for very high volume devices, and TE is an expert in this area. You have stamped metal, and these can also be stamped metal pieces are usually customized antennas designed for certain applications. Of course, we have PCB antennas, flex antennas. We do printed antennas and ceramic antennas. We also have a complete line of external antennas, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. So some of the mounting types that TE produces today, we have what we call an FPC with a pigtail antenna. You could have your main board here as it's shown in the picture with basically a small connector connecting to the board, and then you can attach the antenna anywhere you want to inside a box, for example. So this is what we call an embedded antenna. We have a PC tab mount antenna, which basically if you have some free vertical space, this is a good option because your ground plane doesn't need to be as large as it would as a surface mount. And speaking of surface mount, let's talk about a surface mount antenna. T offers surface mount antennas too. As you can tell there by the light green in that third picture, that light green is basically the grounding plane for a surface mount antenna. And then we also do custom antennas. These are those stamped metal antennas. They could be LDS antennas. These are custom designs that we particularly do for customers that are really space constrained or cost is a huge factor and a standard antenna just won't, a standard antenna is not the right solution. Also, custom antennas are very important if you're wanting to try to do one antenna structure for all the radio protocols inside the device. So T does a lot of this for a lot of different customers today. The other option TE offers now as a part of, we purchased a company called Layered, the external antennas from Layered, and now they're part of TE. So we also have a lot of different options on the external side. So we have multi-port antennas. We have two different styles. We got puck styles, and we have like what we call the fin styles. Then we also have single port type antennas that are used very commonly in stationary devices. For example, if they're at a factory or things like that. And we also do just standard GPS antennas too. So if you have more questions about these, we have more information listed on our webpage later on. So now let's walk around the design again here, and let's talk about the SMA connector, or how are you gonna use, sorry, not SMA, the SIM card connector here. And some of the key questions here, are you allowing the customer to change out SIM cards as needed? Does the device need basically a data log or a backup on it? So T offers a couple of different solutions in this area. So we have a push-pull type, a block type, push-pull, push-push type, different items like that. So some of these design challenges too, we've actually come up with some unique devices. So you can have a SIM card plus an SD card in the same type of SIM holder. So these are some of the many options that you have out there. And if you want more details on that, these are available on T's website too. So the next one we want to talk about is all the other devices that would connect to, for example, the main MCU or the main board. We have something like a SD connector, like we talked about, SD holder, like we talked about before. You have power and battery connectors. So this is important on how you're going to power the device. We have something called spring fingers, and these are also used for antennas, grounding planes, joining boards together, etc. And speaking of joining boards to boards together, at the very bottom here, we have a lot of different connectors that can meet your needs, like board to board, wired to board, flex printed circuit board connectors, and then fine pitch. Some of the fine pitch are very popular nowadays to be used in really small devices. And the one I want to highlight next is basically the USB connectors. This is a very common thing. A lot of Fleet Telematics devices are starting to use USB as a powering mechanism, as a backup mechanism, and also a way to download any of the information if you want to connect it to a computer, for example. So let's look at some of those. So let's look at a USB-C type connector. This is the universal connector that there is no up and down. You just plug it in and it works. So T offers a bunch of different mounts here. So some of the key questions on this is like, is this device portable? So a lot of times if the device is portable, you're going to move it to vehicle to vehicle. USB is a very common method to power those types of devices. IP rating. So for example, maybe this is in a trailer and using batteries, and you charge it via batteries through a USB connector. But these USB connectors may need to be waterproof. So T offers a huge line of waterproof USB connectors. And if you have more questions about those, please let us know. And they're also available on the T website. So let's talk about another type of connector here, this fine pitch board-to-board connector at the bottom right-hand corner around the orange block there. So fine pitch board to board, these are very common now used in a lot of devices that are trying to reduce size. And the reason it is because how many boards you're going to have in one device. Sometimes you could have 3 or 4 PCBs in there with different devices on them. How are you going to connect those all together? And this is a very common theme on that. The other piece on this, find board-to-board connectors here. They actually can carry a lot of current on these devices. For example, you have a wide range here up to 12 amps, for example. So that's very important for that piece. Let's look at a different connector here. It's called a spring finger. Spring fingers are very common used in basically if you have an LDS antenna, for example, that's etched into the plastics. How are you going to get that contact from that piece of plastic has an LDS antenna into it to the actual board? And spring fingers are a very common attribute to do that. So we offer lots of different spring finger type connectors. We have box C, preloaded ones, Ys, and even really small ones. And the idea behind these is that there is a pressure always applied to a contact point. So the current capacities on these is pretty high too, basically a 0.5 amp all the way up to 4.2 amps. So these are very commonly used nowadays in different structures like this. So if you have any questions about that, please let us know. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Marco Scuzzi to talk about some of the Telit solutions that are available. And if you have more questions from TE, please contact that link below, te.com at fleettelematics.com. Marco?
Thank you, Nathan. Actually, I've learned a lot today. So, hi everyone, glad to be here today. Thanks again to TE Connectivity for inviting me to this webinar. So before we dive into today's focus topic, please allow me to tell you a couple of words about Telit for those of you who don't know the company. Telit is a global provider of IoT solutions. It's in the IoT business is more than 20 years, ever since it was not even called IoT. In fact, it was called M2M, machine to machine, back in the day. Telit IoT solutions are made of 3 main pillars that are the wireless communication modules, cellular modems, but also GNSS receivers, as well as Wi-Fi and Bluetooth modules, cellular connectivity plans, and global IoT MVNO SIM cards. And the third pillar is the cloud platform for device and connectivity management. Now, jumping into today's discussion, Nathan has done a great job explaining what are all the hardware components of a Fleet Telematics solution. So now I'll focus on the wireless communication module part, and I'll start talking about the cellular connectivity requirements of a Fleet Telematics application. This matrix here is an attempt to map IoT use cases to cellular technologies based on the specific requirements of different applications. You can see data rate, which goes together with LT category, and mobility capabilities on the vertical axis. While on the horizontal axis, you have the frequency of transmissions and battery life. Specifically, Fleet Telematics requires high mobility because we are talking about vehicles that are moving around. Mid-speed data transmission, it's usually good enough for telemetry data, and telematics is usually not very sensitive to power consumption, as most of the time telematics devices are attached to the main power of the vehicle and not running on a battery, even if there could be exceptions. Also, when you need to track a moving vehicle, you need to receive GPS signal and upload the location data to a control center quite frequently. And this can be every hour or even more than that. So all of that being considered, the best cellular technologies that can provide full mobility capabilities, multi-country roaming, and sufficient data speed are LT Category 1 and Category M1. Now, with the help of the next slide, let's go more in detail about what are the typical needs of a Fleet Telematics application and how LT category M1 and category 1 can solve those challenges. So the first question, is low to mid speed enough for the device? Yes, we said that it's enough to send location or telemetry data. You don't need super speed devices for that. Actually, 2G and 3G could also do the job, but those are old sunsetting technologies and so are not recommended for new design. On the contrary, Cat1 and its further evolution to Cat M1 ensure a long life cycle with the capability to upgrade the firmware of the device over the air. You can do that to the devices in the field and keep them connected for many years to go. We have already mentioned mobility as a key requirement for vehicle tracking. And when I say mobility, I mean unlimited mobility. So in any remote corner of a country, as well as across country borders. Then power, as said before, usually telematics devices are attached to the main power of the vehicle. So low power consumption is not a major concern. But if instead low power consumption is important, then LT Cat M1 is optimized for battery operation. Now, narrowing it down to the top challenges of fleet telematics. Next slide, please. Top challenges are about continuous tracking, keeping down the connectivity costs wherever the device is roaming. And let's not forget it, being able to always do remote monitoring and management of a large fleet is paramount. So now we agree that those pain points can be addressed and solved by Cat1 and Cat M1 cellular technology and SO modules. Cat1 modules are preferable for the maturity and global availability of the technology, including seamless global roaming. Category M1 modules are better in terms of low power consumption, if that is relevant. And it's important to mention that Cat M1 is a 5G ready technology that will be maintained and evolved for many years to go. So it will enjoy a longer lifespan in the cellular networks. The good news here is that with Telit modules, you can hit two birds with one stone, thanks to our unified form factor family paradigm. Let me present it to you. So our philosophy of Telit is to offer modules that are both hardware and software compatible. And this across multiple cellular technology generations. So you can buy Telit modules that share the same pinout and electrical interfaces, as well as the same AT commands and software APIs in 2G and 3G, legacy technologies, and all the way up to 4G LT category 1 and even 5G ready category M1. All without any need to redesign and respin your device or re-engineer your software application. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. So far, Nathan and I have mainly been talking about the hardware components needed to make a fleet telematics device. Let me spend some time to cover also some of the software related pieces that are required to build a complete fleet telematics solutions. First of all, the wireless communication module itself is not only made of hardware, but also modern modules have more and more processing capabilities. In fact, you can use them as microprocessors to code and run your application, getting rid of any additional MCU in your electronic board. This is what in Telit we call App Zone, Application Zone. That is an application development environment, a set of software APIs that are available for you to write your code in standard C language straight into the module processor. Then deploying an IoT solution is not only about installing connected devices in the field, but it is also about having the right tools to monitor and manage them remotely through their entire life cycle. OneEdge is the Telit brand name for our efficient zero-touch onboarding out-of-the-box device management solution that gives you exactly the required tools to be able to remotely manage a fleet of devices at any time. Then last but not least, when you have the right wireless communication module in place and the proper remote management tools, the last piece you are missing to launch a fleet telematics service is the cellular connectivity. So the SIM card and the data plan. And Telit can help you here, as we are an IoT MVNO, a virtual network operator. We have global SIM cards and IoT tailored data plans that can connect your devices across almost the geographies. So you can make sure you can always take the data from them and process them in your control center. Next slide, please. So you have heard me talking a lot about cellular modules and cellular connectivity. Now, let me touch upon another key component of a telematic solution, and this is the satellite positioning, GPS or GNSS as it is called, that is required for location and tracking. Depending on the GNSS location update refresh requirement, you have two main design options. One, you can use an embedded GNSS, meaning a GNSS receiver that is integrated in the cellular module. So same component for two functions. Or second option, you can use a standalone external GNSS, so a dedicated separate GNSS receiver, a second module. As it happens most of the time, it's the typical trade-off between cost and size on the one hand, and performance in terms of location accuracy and power consumption on the other hand. And if you choose to go for an embedded GNSS solution, then you have two more options available, depending on whether you need concurrent, that is simultaneous, cellular and GNSS use or not. Typically, continuous tracking type applications need to track the GNSS position and at the same time upload the data to the cloud. While this is maybe not a strict requirement for low or sporadic update rate type applications. So it really depends on what you need to do with the GNSS receiver. In the next slide, you can see a few test drive images and data that show the performance benchmark between embedded and standalone GNSS solutions. As you can see from the three different lines, as long as the RF condition, the radio conditions are good, the performance is comparable for embedded GNSS solutions that are those in red and yellow and standalone in green. While when you are in harsh environments, such as a urban canyon or forest areas, then the embedded GNSS lines, so the red and the yellow line, diverge from the green line that is the most accurate. We talk about scattering effect, a sort of zigzag pattern, and static wandering, that is an undesired effect when the device is still, for example, in the queue at the traffic lights, but the positioning algorithm recalculates the position continuously, showing some fake movement without recognizing that the device, the vehicle, is instead just still. Bottom line, the choice between embedded and standalone GNSS really depends on how accurate you need the positioning algorithm to be for your scope and how much you care, for example, about other parameters like size of the hardware solution or power consumption. So to wrap it up, in the next slide, please. You have heard from Nathan about the extensive hardware component offering that TE Connectivity can provide you to build your fleet telematics solution. Then let me try to summarize why Telit can be your good partner to complete the puzzle. We can provide all the building blocks required to get your devices connected with cellular technologies, from the hardware communication modules to the managed connectivity services with our global MVNO SIM cards and data plans, as well as a turnkey device management and data orchestration cloud platform. And with regards to the satellite positioning piece, you don't need to go around and look for a third different partner, as we have multiple flexible options we can offer you in terms also of GNSS modules, GNSS receiver, as we discussed, depending on the requirements of your application. Okay, so lastly, before jumping to the Q&A session, please let me just invite you to visit telit.com website to know more about our solutions for fleet telematics and get started with our evaluation kits that are an easy way to try out Telit products and services. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Leticia.
Thank you, Marco. I wanted to thank both of you for your time today. That concludes our presentation. We hope this presentation was insightful for you. If you have any questions, please visit us at t.com/fleet telematic or telit.com/telematics. And we would be happy to help you. We would like to thank you for your time and wish you a great rest of the day. Thank you.